Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we'll be building a 1/72nd scale kit of everyone's favourite stealth vehicle in War Thunder, the ASU-57 Soviet Airborne tank. Now this is one I designed myself in Blender and 3D printed using a resin printer. I'm currently selling the STL files on my Cults page, which I'll leave a link to in the description. But for this video, we're just going to be having a build of one of my prototypes. After I've printed the ASU-57 using my Anycubic 6KS and cleaned it of any uncured resin in the wash and curing machine, I remove the parts from the build plate and use a pair of sprue cutters to carefully trim away the support material. With the early version I'm making here, I didn't have enough supports for the gun, so it's a bit bent and has a few subtle gouges in it, but this can be fixed by adding supports between the hull and gun as I've done with later versions. With the supports removed, I then give all of the parts a wash in warm soapy water to remove any dust or residue, before then giving the parts a few coats of Vallejo white aerosol primer. I don't always prime plastic models, but I always like to prime my resin models to help the paint adhere more to them and also find any imperfections early on. Once primed and dry, I begin to glue the tracks and the vision flaps to the hull using my preferred glue for resin, which is Deluxe Materials Rocket Odorless CA glue. This glue acts fast, dries clear, and I found it stronger and less brittle than most other super glues. The tracks and suspension have a square segment to help line them up with the hull, and for the flaps I decided to glue one open and the other shut. Once the glue is dry, I begin painting the entire model using a large brush to apply some Vallejo model colour 70824 Russian Uniform Green. I mix the uniform green with some water to thin it down, and then apply it onto the upper surface of the vehicle first, and once that's dry I paint the wheels and the lower side of the hull. To get the best results when brush painting, it's best to keep your layers nice and thin, and build them up in several layers until you have a result you're happy with. I painted a further 2 coats of the Russian Uniform Green until it was nice and solid, making a total of 3 coats. Next I painted the tracks with some Vallejo model colour 70864 natural steel using a fine brush to pick out the track parts. I also used the natural steel to paint the gun and some Tamiya X31 Titan Gold to paint the shells. To repair the gun barrel I use a bit of water-based putty to fill some of the divots. I applied another coat of the natural steel to paint onto the gun breech, and started to paint other details including the seat covers with Vallejo model colour 70976 and Vallejo 70921 English Uniform Brown for the padding. Some Vallejo flat black was used to carefully paint the driver's panel and the gunner's sight using a fine brush, as well as to pick out the rubber on the wheels and to paint the underside of the hull, creating a shadow effect. Vallejo model colour flat white was used to paint the recoil guard on the gun and raised instrument dials on the driver's panel. After some touch-ups using these various colours, I then got out some Vallejo water-based matte varnish, and after mixing it with some water I applied it onto the entire model except for the tracks using a large brush. The varnish will help to protect the paint and give it a nice matte finish. I gave the varnish 12 hours to dry and in the meantime painted the exhausts using X31 Titan Gold. A second coat of matte varnish was then applied to make the coat nice and even. After the second and final coat of the matte varnish was dry, I got out some Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium and used a fine brush to dry brush it onto the various edges, raise details on the tank and around the interior and mudguards to create some metal chipping. The front and rear lights were then painted with Vallejo Model Air RLM01 Silver to give them a nice shiny appearance. Once dried, I toned down the metal chipping by applying a light amount of uniform green in some areas around the edges to reduce it and give a bit of a layered effect. Next I gave the whole model a coat of Tamiya Black Panel Accent. This enamel based wash will flow into the various recesses on the tank, helping to highlight the details and give them a grimy and post shaded effect. Once dry, the excess enamel is then removed, and the effect softened by rubbing a cotton bud that has been dipped in enamel thinners over the entire model to remove the excess panel liner. Once the thinners and panel wash have dried, the silver tail lights were then painted over with Tamiya Clear Red, giving them the appearance of red lights. To create a build-up of dirt and dried grass around the running gear, I used a cocktail stick to apply some Vallejo mud and grass weathering effects. This was applied mainly on the tracks, but also quite heavily between the tracks and on the mud guards. To add a build-up of dried dust on the wheels and streaking down the side of the model, I used some Tamiya Master Weathering Pigments. I activate the mud powder using a damp brush, and then streak it down the side of the vehicle and apply it onto the wheels. For some lighter streaking, I use the sand pigment and apply it in the same fashion. As the pigments dry, I then use a wide brush dipped in water to thin the effect down and make it a little bit softer, and also help create the streaking effect down the sides of the tank. Finally, I used some rust pigment on the exhaust, along with some black pigments to create some exhaust soot and gun smoke on the muzzle brake, and with that, my prototype for my 1/72nd scale ASU-57 was finally completed. And here you can see the finished model. So on the whole, I'm really happy with how this one turned out, especially all the rivet and interior details, and I found the assembly for it a lot simpler and better fitting than my T20 and ZIS-30 designs, which I've also done. I enjoyed building it, and apart from the issues with the gun barrel, I think it turned out pretty great. At some point, I'll also design the canvas roof cover, and if anyone has any corrections or suggestions for improvements, I'd be glad to hear them, and if practical, I'll implement them into the model that I'm selling. As with my other resin designs, the file for this kit is available to purchase on my Colts page, and my Aviator and Tanker tier patrons get a discount of 10 and 20% when buying them respectively. Although it certainly has its limits and issues, I'm convinced 3D printing is quickly becoming a great asset for model makers, and the idea of being able to literally design and produce your own kits and upgrades is something that really excites me. I look forward to continuing to develop my skills and sharing both the files and the builds I create even more in the future. Thanks very much for watching my ASU-57 build video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel, as it really helps out. And if you have any questions or suggestions on how I can improve both my design and modelling work, please leave it down in the comment section below. A massive shout out to my wonderful patrons for helping me to fund not only making these videos and buying the kits I review, but also helping to fund my design work and also my animations I'm working on. I have several other 3D designs I plan to do some videos on, and for next week's video I plan to have both the inbox review of the FW190D from IBG and also a build video on the PST KV2, which I did an inbox review of last week. Otherwise though, thanks again for watching this video, and as always, take care, and until the next one, model on.